For nearly 3 decades, Lawrence Welk was one of the most recognizable faces on American television. With his gentle voice, charming accent, and signature floating champagne bubbles, he welcomed millions of viewers into their living rooms every Saturday night. To audiences, he seemed like a friendly grandfather leading a joyful, musical family. His show appeared safe, wholesome, and comforting during a time when the world outside often felt complicated. Families could gather together to enjoy music that avoided controversy and focused on simple, polite entertainment. From the stage lights to the carefully chosen melodies, everything felt cheerful and uncomplicated. Yet behind this polished image, a very different story was unfolding. Beneath the smiling performances and carefully choreographed routines, there was a strict system of control, careful financial planning, and personal rules that many performers quietly accepted, even if they were not entirely fair. Lawrence Welk's television empire began in the 1950s and quickly became one of the most successful music programs in American broadcasting. Every week, singers, dancers, and musicians performed upbeat songs in front of a brightly lit stage, creating an illusion of a world that was joyful, easy, and uncomplicated. To viewers, the performers were like one big happy family, smiling and entertaining without worry. However, the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. Many of the performers worked under strict rules, limited financial rewards, and constant scrutiny. The cheerful image audiences loved was carefully protected, reflecting Welk's belief that viewers preferred tradition over modern trends. While this approach created comfort for fans, it sometimes created tension for the people who actually made the show possible. One of the biggest contradictions in Lawrence Welk's career was the way he compensated the performers who brought his show to life. Although the program generated enormous profits and millions of viewers watched every week, performers were typically paid only the union scale, the lowest legal wage allowed by the performers' union. This system applied to everyone, whether they were newcomers or well-known favorites. There were no special contracts, no long-term guarantees, and very little room for negotiation. Welk often discouraged performers from hiring agents or managers, believing outside representation complicated business arrangements. Many musicians felt uncomfortable challenging the man who controlled their careers, and as a result, most accepted the pay they were given, despite the show's profitability. One famous example involved the Lennon sisters, a trio of young vocalists who became a staple of the program. For 10 years, they reportedly earned only $110 a week. Later, they were promoted to what was called solo scale, which increased their salary to $210 weekly. Yet even as they became national celebrities, their pay never rose much higher. When they requested a modest raise, Welk refused, stating that no performer was worth more than union scale. Decades later, Peggy Lennon admitted that despite years of national fame, none of the sisters had accumulated significant savings while on the show. This stark contrast between the growing fortune of Welk himself and the modest lives of his performers revealed a side of television that audiences never saw. While viewers enjoyed the smiles, music, and floating bubbles on the screen, behind the camera, financial inequality and strict control shaped the lives of the people who made the show possible. While the performers earned modest wages, Lawrence Welk himself quietly built an impressive business empire. By the 1970s, his ventures extended far beyond television. He owned multiple music publishing companies, controlled the copyrights to thousands of songs, and made shrewd investments in real estate. His music catalog included over 4,600 compositions, such as the works of legendary composer Jerome Kern, which he purchased for $3.2 million, a deal that later proved extremely valuable. Welk's real estate ventures included the Lawrence Welk Plaza in Santa Monica, California, a 21-story building that became the tallest in the city at the time. This building eventually sold for $73 million. He also developed a 1,000-acre resort near Escondido, California, which quickly became one of Southern California's most popular attractions, drawing nearly 40,000 visitors each month. Over the years, his music publishing empire expanded to include roughly 27,000 copyrights across more than 100 companies. By 1988, the music catalog alone sold for $25 million. Even after his death in 1992, Welk's business ventures continued generating significant income, with the family eventually selling resort properties for hundreds of millions of dollars. By the end of his life, Lawrence Welk's personal fortune was estimated at around $150 million. While performers received modest wages, the sheer scale of his wealth demonstrated his talent not only as an entertainer but as a disciplined and strategic businessman. Despite his financial success, Welk often defended his approach, arguing that performers received something even more valuable than high pay: national exposure. Appearing on a weekly television program that reached millions of people could lead to concert bookings, record deals, and long-term careers. For some musicians, this argument was true. Many remained on the program for years, with the average performer staying nearly 9 seasons. The show offered stability in an industry where work was rarely guaranteed. For performers seeking consistent employment and exposure, it could be an appealing arrangement. Yet, the contrast between Welk's fortune and the modest lives of his performers remained striking. The smiling band leader who appeared warm and generous on screen was also a businessman who controlled nearly every detail of the program. He decided the songs, costumes, and even the public presentation of his performers. This strict control became particularly clear in the case of Alice Lon, a young singer who joined the program in 1955. As the show's first official champagne lady, she quickly became popular due to her lively personality and confident stage presence. However, her career ended abruptly in 1959 after a seemingly minor gesture during a performance, sitting on a desk and crossing her legs, was deemed inappropriate. Welk dismissed her, believing the act crossed a moral line. Although she was briefly offered a chance to return, the incident had damaged her career, and she declined. This story highlighted the level of control Welk exerted over his performers and the consequences of stepping outside his carefully constructed image. Personal tragedies also affected the performers behind the Lawrence Welk Show. The Lennon sisters faced one of the darkest events in the program's history in 1969 when an obsessed fan, Chad Young, murdered their father, William Lennon. This horrifying act shocked the country and left the sisters in fear for their safety, requiring police protection for a period. Despite these personal hardships, the show continued under Welk's strict rules. Performers were expected to maintain a morally traditional image, reflecting Welk's conservative Catholic values. Even pregnancies were carefully concealed on stage through creative staging, props, and camera angles. Dresses had to remain modest, and deviations from his rules could have serious consequences. Welk even involved himself in performers' personal lives, sometimes influencing relationships and disapproving of actions like divorce. For performers, this meant navigating not only the demands of performing but also the moral and personal expectations imposed by Welk. Despite the strict environment, some performers appreciated the stability and exposure the show offered. Arthur Duncan, the talented tap dancer, became a unique presence on television at a time when racial segregation and discrimination were widespread. When a Southern television station requested his removal, Welk refused to comply, allowing Duncan to continue on the program. This loyalty demonstrated that, despite his rigid control, Welk could also support performers he believed belonged on the show. Still, performers often had to balance personal challenges, such as addiction or legal troubles, with the polished, cheerful image expected on camera. Joan Castle, a pianist known for her energetic performances, faced serious struggles offstage, highlighting the contrast between public perception and private reality. Even Bob Roston, another cast member, experienced both success and complications in his life after the show, underscoring the complex lives of the entertainers behind the smiling faces. The show itself, while immensely popular, was sometimes disconnected from cultural changes outside the studio. In the early 1970s, a performance of the folk song One Toke Over the Line revealed this gap. The song referenced marijuana use, part of the growing counterculture, but Welk introduced it as a modern spiritual, misunderstanding its meaning entirely. The performance, polished in the traditional style of the program, became a memorable and awkward moment for viewers. Welk preferred traditional melodies, big band arrangements, and gentle vocals, rarely including modern trends like rock, soul, or disco. This resistance to change frustrated some performers, leading many to leave the program to pursue more creative freedom elsewhere. Jazz clarinetist Pete Fountain, for instance, became widely respected after leaving the orchestra. Even those who remained sometimes struggled with personal difficulties, highlighting the gap between the program's polished surface and the realities behind the scenes. Lawrence Welk remained committed to discipline and order. Every song, costume, and public appearance was carefully supervised, creating an environment where obedience and talent were equally valued. Performers described the show as strict, yet steady, offering job security in an industry often marked by uncertainty. The average performer stayed nearly a decade, a remarkably long tenure for television at the time. At the same time, stories about Welk's unusual personality, extreme frugality, and eccentric decisions became part of his legacy. Holiday bonuses were often small gifts instead of cash, and performers sometimes received items like pens or trinkets instead of financial rewards. These anecdotes reinforced his reputation as a businessman who prioritized careful management and savings over generosity, even as his fortune grew. Lawrence Welk's influence extended far beyond the stage. His careful control of performers, strict moral expectations, and conservative musical choices shaped the program for nearly 30 years. Millions of viewers tuned in weekly to see the familiar performers and floating champagne bubbles, experiencing comfort and consistency in their entertainment. Yet, behind the scenes, the lives of the performers were shaped by strict rules, personal tragedies, and the immense authority of Welk. Even after the show ended in 1982, Welk's empire continued to evolve. Legal disputes within the family over control of assets, such as lawsuits involving Lawrence Welk Jr. and Kevin Welk, revealed the complex nature of the business he built. The empire included music publishing, real estate, and resorts, and it remained influential decades after his death in 1992. These developments show that Welk's legacy is both personal and professional, combining entertainment with strategic business management. Ultimately, Lawrence Welk remains a fascinating figure in television history. To viewers, he was the gentle band leader who brought music and joy into homes for decades. Behind the bubbles and cheerful melodies, however, existed a complex world of ambition, discipline, and control. Performers navigated modest pay, strict rules, personal tragedies, and limited creative freedom, while Welk grew his fortune and carefully curated his public image.